The Detroit Pistons have traded Jaden Ivey to the Chicago Bulls in exchange essentially for Kevin Huerter, Dario Saric, and a pick swap from Minnesota. We're going to get into all of that. This is just going to be a super quick episode here for you guys. I'm thinking maybe just a quick 10 or 15 minutes. And obviously, if you're here in video, then you know Blake's not here. So this is just me. And I've actually never done this on my own before. So hopefully, that turns out all right. But we're going to talk about all of that, just get some instant kind of reaction to this deal and break down a little bit of Kevin Huerter, as well as just kind of do a swift obit on Jaden Ivey's time in Detroit. So with all of that said, welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys. So yeah, the entire framework of that trade, Detroit is receiving here Kevin Huerter, Dario Saric, a pick swap from Minnesota for a first-round pick in 2026. The Bulls are getting Jaden Ivey and Mike Conley Jr. This is really the reason that the Minnesota Timberwolves are wanting to make this deal to get off of his salary. They are getting some pretty significant luxury tax savings in this deal, which is why they're willing to give up that little pick swap there. And they're really not getting anything back, at least as far as I have seen. Now, I know that this deal has not been made official yet, so it's possible that this gets expanded out. And we do, of course, know that the Timberwolves are hunting down the Giannis path, so maybe something comes out of that with this. But whether or not the Timberwolves end up making a deal that big doesn't really have too much of an impact here, because there is enough incentive with all of that cap savings, luxury tax savings that the Timberwolves are getting out of a deal like this, just getting off Conley Jr.'s salary, that they do have an incentive to actually go through with this no matter what. So, we can kind of leave the Giannis stuff aside real quick. With that pick, this is not the case that the Pistons just got a first-round pick in return for Jaden Ivey. They kind of did. They kind of didn't. So I believe, as far as I can tell, that this first-round pick that the Pistons are now getting, it was already promised to Utah. So here's how that kind of works. Minnesota had agreed previously in a separate trade. I forget exactly who with. Maybe was the Gobert trade. I'd have to go back and look at that. But I believe that there was already agreement to swap picks between Minnesota and the Utah Jazz. And that pick swap from Minnesota's perspective was protected 1 through 19. So if Minnesota was going to have a pick, it was flipped. If Minnesota was going to have a pick 20 through 30, well, then they were going to keep that pick. If it was from 1 to 19, then it was going to the Jazz, essentially, as far as I can tell. What that means for Detroit is essentially this pick now is a swap between Utah and Detroit. So if the pick is between 1 and 19 in this year's upcoming draft, well, then it's going to go ahead and get over to Utah. If it's between 20 and 30 for the Timberwolves, then it's going to come to Detroit. And Minnesota right now looks like they're at about 23rd if the season ended today and we solidified all of those draft slots. So good chance that the Pistons are going to get a pick out of this. It's just going to be a late first-round pick. It's not as exciting as, say, getting a lottery pick in exchange for, frankly, a lottery player that the Pistons did invest in way back when. So that's the full kind of scope of the deal. Kevin Huerter Jr. is interesting. I think we should probably start there. So here's the rub with Kevin Huerter. He averages this year 10.9 points, 3.8 rebounds, 2.6 assists on 45, 31, 73. That's from the floor, 3-point line, and free throw line, respectively. Now, I do have some of his synergy numbers here, and shout out to Bryce Simon from Motor City Hoops for that. If you guys are not reading the Motor City Hoops Substack, you absolutely should be. There's great analysis in that. And he already has a post up that just has some of his previous notes with Kevin Huerter, which is pretty great. So it's an awesome resource you guys should be leveraging. Regardless, from Synergy, so on all catch and shoot 3-point attempts last season, Kevin Huerter was 32%. On unguarded catch and shoot 3-point attempts, he was 38%, which is pretty good. He shot 48% on 2-point dribble jumpers, 73% on runners, though on very low volume for those runners. And then at the rim, 67%, which is actually really, really good. So I do think Kevin Huerter is a little bit more of a well-rounded offensive player than people give him credit for. For example, this season he is averaging more assists than Jaden Ivey. He's a pretty good pick-and-roll ball handler player. Again, that's coming from Synergy. He grades out as very good as a pick-and-roll ball handler, very good in transition, and just average as a spot-up player. So Kevin Huerter, he's got a reputation as being just kind of a catch-and-shoot guy, and he can do that. In the past, he's shown that he is, or at least he has history of being a good shooter. We'll get into that. There's a little question there, but we'll get into that in a second. So he's got history as a good shooter, but he can do a little bit more than that too. He maybe can't go ahead and get his own, but if you give him a screen, he can nail a pull-up mid-range jumper. He can get to the rim and finish. Kevin Huerter, he's pretty well-rounded offensively. But the Pistons presumably are wanting to make this move in order to get more shooting, justifiably so. Blake and I have talked about that quite a bit as we've been leading up to this deadline. Kevin Huerter, when he was an Atlanta Hawk, was a great shooter. He was. Over 274 games, Kevin Huerter shot 38% from three on almost 5.5 attempts. That's really good. Pistons would love to add that guy. However, he left Atlanta, he went to Sacramento, and then he left Sacramento and he went to the Chicago Bulls. And this has been a precipitous fall ever since then. So immediately after leaving the Bulls, he shoots 40% from three, which is good. Then 36%, not as good, but still league average. Then 34% during the season he got traded to Chicago. And so far this year, 31% from three. And that's obviously not great. So the question, I think, with this contract, with this deal with Kevin Huerter, because he is going to get paid a handsome sum here this season. He's going to get $18 million in salary. Which Kevin Huerter are the Pistons getting? Is this a player that can kind of be super Tim Hardaway Jr.? Right? Is this a player that does have those movement shooting skills, that is a very good shooter in catch and shoot, pretty good on open catch and shoot, which is great, but can handle a little bit, can get some at the rim, can make a 2-point pull-up jump shot too, decent as a screen navigator offensively with the ball in his hands. Like, if he can do all those things for the Detroit Pistons, this is honestly a really good fit, a really good piece for this team to add. They need someone with this skill set that can step in offensively when Duncan Robinson sits down from his starter spot at the 2. And if that is the player that the Pistons are getting here, then this is, maybe not quite a home run, but a good fit. It may not be exciting, but it is a good fit for this roster. And I would be remiss to not bring up that Kevin Huerter is an expiring contract. So this offseason, the Pistons are going to be able to get off of that money, which again, $18 million. Now, enough on Kevin Huerter. We'll dive into that as we do a trade deadline recap. You guys watch for that later in the week with Blake and I. But Dario Saric he was an interesting player. He's not done much this season or recent seasons as well. You wonder if maybe that is a cut candidate or if he's going to get rerouted somewhere else. Dario Saric at one point was a very good rotational 4, and he's just not quite that guy anymore at this point in his career. So really, from a Pistons perspective, it would seem to me that the big takeaway, the big win, is getting Kevin Huerter and getting that pick swap. So the Pistons will technically have 2 first-round picks in this upcoming draft, as long as things kind of stay the way that they are. Those won't be exciting picks, but if the Pistons are picking, I don't know, let's just say 27, and then they get this Minnesota pick that might be 23, that's still an asset. That's still nice to have. The bigger story is, of course, Jaden Ivey. So this is the end of the Jaden Ivey era for Detroit this season. In right around 15 minutes a game, Jaden Ivey had been averaging 8.2 points, 2.2 rebounds, and 1.6 assists on 45, 37, 79 from the floor, 3-point line, and free throw line, respectively. And, Jaden Ivey, I think we have to give him some credit as well as a little bit of grace. I'm going to maintain that position. I think he really came into a difficult situation individually for this team. Obviously, he's coming off that gruesome leg injury from last season, ramps his way back up, gets into training camp through the preseason, and then has to have a cleanup procedure on one of his knees and misses a bunch of time to start the year. And what happens is, at least from Ivey's perspective, right, he starts training camp in the preseason as a starting player for this Detroit Pistons team. And then by the time that he returns, that role is no longer available to him. Duncan Robinson had fully solidified himself as an invaluable piece of that starting lineup for the Pistons with his shooting and his size. And Jaden Ivey, for all of the benefits that he has, really doesn't fill that. And of course, the Pistons' success plays into that. But, I do think that Jaden Ivey's play itself had kind of fit into that as well. He hasn't quite gotten that explosiveness back that we saw from him when he was healthy last season. He's been a very good shooter, but he's still struggled at the rim with his finishing, which has been a through line in his entire career. And if he's not going to have that athleticism, or at least right now when he doesn't have that athleticism, well, then that actually becomes a little bit more of an issue. His assists were down, his rebounds were down. He wasn't getting the free throw line as much as he had been before. Basically, all of your athletic indicators, and then the playmaking, I'm still going to put as an athletic indicator, because what Jaden Ivey historically has done in the NBA is get an advantage with his incredible first step and then make some plays out of that. He gained, I don't know how many assists over his course of time in Detroit as just a drive and kick player, and he was really good at it, right? And we just haven't seen that as much this year, and I don't think that was necessarily helped by him not being able to play with the players he did his ramp up period with. So I don't want to excuse Jaden Ivey. I just think that a lot of what we'd seen this year is an unfortunate product of circumstance. He had some ramp up time taken away from him, and then he got thrust into a situation that he's never really been in before. Certainly not in the NBA, where he's really coming off the bench and kind of forced to figure out that role. Now, hopefully in Chicago, all of that's going to get sorted out. We're obviously wishing Jaden Ivey the best, and I hope that he becomes the player that we all thought and hoped that he could be. But there is one other factor that should be brought up when we're looking at this deal, and we're going to close on this. But Kyle brought it up in our most recent podcast when he was talking about the value of Jaden Ivey to Detroit. Jaden Ivey's cap hold, if the Pistons were to give him a qualifying offer, sits near $30 million. It is a very expensive cap hold, under the impression that a player that is drafted that highly is likely to receive a rather large contract extension for their second deal. And that was obviously not the direction that things were heading with Jaden Ivey. And if you look at this Pistons roster, they are going to have a lot of not only financial commitments this offseason, but they're still going to be tasked with trying to improve this team via trade and free agency. And having a cap hold that large is not only difficult because you can't really sign free agents, but it's also kind of a barrier to other trades that you might make if it's not a direct sign and trade with Jaden Ivey. And you got to wonder if Jaden had continued to play like this, right? If maybe he just needed this season as a ramp up period to get his legs back underneath him. And really it was next year that he's going to start looking like himself again, assuming that would happen. Well, then, what would his value really be here in the offseason as well for a sign and trade? Would you really be able to count on another team being interested in bringing in Jaden Ivey in offering him a contract to a restricted free agent and going through that entire process? We've seen now this past offseason how some other free agents like Cam Thomas in Brooklyn, for example, really struggled to bring in deals to give themselves options other than that qualifying offer. And where the Pistons are sitting, if that were to be the situation that played out with Jaden Ivey, then that's $30 million that they do not have access to either in trades or, theoretically with free agents. So, that's not necessarily how it would work. It would just be a hindrance to their offseason plans to have to wait that out, potentially really late into the summer, like we did see with Cam Thomas. So it just, it's unfortunate. I have been a big fan of Jaden Ivey, so this one was a bit of a bummer for me as well. I really wanted to see him succeed in Detroit. I was very excited and on the Jaden Ivey bandwagon prior to that draft. I thought it was a steal to get him at 5. It's just not quite worked out in the way that we and that myself have wanted it to. And given the situation here in Detroit with Jaden playing a role that, he's not really used to, not being put in a position to get his, bearings again, not being placed out there on the floor with the guys that he had been working with in training camp when he was starting to get his feet underneath him again, right? You're dealing with fewer minutes. You're still dealing with all that recovery. You've got all of this restricted free agent issue and how long that cap hold might be. Are you really going to keep him around for the qualifying offer? The point is all of these questions, all of these kind of barriers in Jaden Ivey's way, I think that those wound up being pretty important. So if you look at just what Jaden Ivey did for the Pistons this year, fairly good shooter, okay, if not below average defender. I would lean more to below average there. And then, pretty middling when it comes to the other stuff like rebounds, assists, things along those lines, just general impact. I think, he was solid, if not unspectacular. Well, Kevin Huerter gives you a lot of those same things. Kevin Huerter is an expiring contract at the end of this year. And Kevin Huerter has a lot of history of being at least being the type of shooter that we've seen out of Jaden Ivey. You wonder if maybe playing next to a guard like Cade Cunningham is going to be helpful to him. When Huerter went to the Bulls last season, he shot nearly 37%, if I'm remembering that number correctly, on the back half of the year after leaving Sacramento. And then this year, Josh Giddey, who's one of the best playmakers in the league, he's been hurt in and out of the lineup. I do think that maybe has had an impact here on Kevin Huerter's three-point percentage, or at least that's what you're hoping if you are a Pistons fan, that Kevin Huerter needs that needs that ability of another point guard to create for him for his three-point shot, and that we're going to see that go back up and get closer to that unguarded catch and shoot number from a couple years ago that I mentioned from Bryce's Substack and Synergy. But that's kind of the high-level overview, the reaction. Like I said, it's kind of a mix of a bummer, and it makes a lot of sense. You understand why the Pistons wanted to do a deal like this, getting a late first-round pick in theory, and then adding a player who has some size, fills a need, and is another expiring contract, which frees up cash for you to use for, say, Jalen Duren, or maybe an Asar Thompson extension, Isaiah Stewart's extension eligible this summer as well. So it does free up some stuff here for Detroit. It makes sense. It is just a bummer to see Jaden Ivey go, and especially to go to a division rival in Chicago. But that being said, hoping for the best for Jaden. And, of course, I do think that this could be a very helpful move. If Kevin Huerter is going to get back to the player that he's been in recent history, this is very much a super Tim Hardaway Jr., a player that you're going to be very happy to have in that playoff rotation when Duncan Robinson sits down, and even before then, because we've seen how some of the spacing issues pop up when we've had Duncan Robinson out for that short period of time early in the season. To wrap this up, if you're looking at the bench lineup for Detroit at this very moment, and this is being recorded here before the Pistons play the Nuggets, but it does look like Caris LeVert is going to play. That makes sense. They don't have Jaden Ivey who can play, so they need a body. I don't think you guys should read into anything with that for the upcoming trade deadline here. But, in theory, they've got Dennis Jenkins, Kevin Huerter, Caris LeVert, Javonte Green, and Ron Holland, and then Isaiah Stewart coming off the bench. And that's a pretty good group of 6 there, which is great. Now, the one last notable thing of this trade, this cannot be the last move that gets made for the Pistons. The Pistons have 16 players on their roster. The limit in the NBA is 15. That does not mean that there's going to be more trades made. It could just be that a couple players get waived so that the Pistons get under that number, and then they add Dennis Jenkins to a full contract. With that, that's a possible route. This also could mean that there are more trades in the works. So make sure you guys are following Detroit Bad Boys. Make sure you guys are following Omari Sankofa and Motor City Hoops, Bryce Simon, Blake, myself, Kyle Metz, Keith Smith, all of these guys. Make sure that you are following for all of the trade deadline breakdown and news for for those national guys, for all the teams, for Pistons specific, all of the Pistons specific topic and reaction as well. Make sure you guys are following and watching for that. And as well, we will certainly have a trade deadline breakdown later in this week on the Pindown. Until then, I'm looking forward to seeing what the Pistons do here as we kind of get to the final stretch of this year's trade deadline. You guys make sure that you do like and subscribe as always for our full podcast. If you want to call and hear your voice on our show, please dial 313-355-2717. You can leave a voicemail message and we will play that as a question on our show. And as always, a special thank you to Sean Corp, the managing editor of Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. My co-host, Blake Silverman, who wasn't here on this one, but for all of the work that he does to support this podcast and keep that going for us, all the great insights that he brings to us, and of course all of the staff at Detroit Bad Boys as well. Special thanks to all of them. And again, please make sure you're following that website and all of those writers for all of the breaking news regarding the Pistons. Until next time, go Pistons, and let's see what Trajan Langdon has in store.